I love this book because it goes so much into why it is the way that it is. And this, like I said, this book it's not even forwardly. I mean, the subtitle is Angelic Magic, Renaissance Thought, and Modern Methods of Sigilization, but it's not like an outwardly Enochian book. So, I guess we will get into it, and then we may do a series on Enochian, but it's so almost off subject. Yeah, I know. Shadow ethers. I get it. But we have to be careful trying to squeeze blood out of a stone. Okay? So, we are going to review the Sacred Alignments and Sigils, but I just wanted to also, for those of you who are interested in Enochian, these are my 5 or 6 recommendations. Yeah, there's other works out there too, but these are the ones that I've read. These are the ones I practice with, so that's all I can recommend. Now, getting into the Sacred Alignments and Sigils. Thank you, John, for recommending that. Again, we interviewed John on the channel. If you'd like to check out the interviews playlist, there's a few dozen interviews on there, and hopefully, well, there's a few dozen in there now. So, firstly, I will go, as I typically do, over the table of contents. That is, excuse me, what I typically look at before I buy a book. It gives you a great idea. So, skipping the acknowledgments and the forward and the preface and notes. The introduction goes over the background and early practices, first contact, preliminary Enochian rites, Bertial, courses and correspondences, ordeals, HGA, reception of the Aeonic grid, and 16 keys to elements. Part 1 is magical cartography, which, what a cool concept. Magical cartography and the grid sigil. This covers the interface between Earth and heavens, the Cartesian grid, D as terrestrial and magical cartographer. For those of you who don't know, a cartographer is someone who makes maps. Magical squares and Enochian tablets, 30 aethers and the Earth, the Tablet of Union, and the Grid Sigil. Part 2 covers ley lines, geomagnetic fields, and the Earth's grid via the terrestrial grid layout, observers of the web through the ages, the Sacred Temple's stellar link, the living Earth, chakras, and neural network. Part 3 covers formation of the Grid Sigil and the astral and terrestrial power of the pyramid via Grid Sigil as power generator, catalyst of the pyramid, and exercises, making it practical. Then part 4 is yantra, form, and the greater design via Renaissance emblemata, syntax of yantras and their construction. That's right, yantras can be seen as having syntax. Very, very cool. So, syntax of yantras and their construction, and figura, early counterpart of sigils, mnemonic tools and sigils, the magical imagination, and precursors of Spar's sigils, or Spare, as in Osman Spar. Part 5, Austin Spar's automatic magic and the grid sigils. Via Sacred Alphabet, underpinnings and development, early magical alphabets, phosphenes, and the somatic link. Phosphenes are what we see when we close our eyes. It's not all they are, but that's also what they are. Phosphenes and the somatic link, soma relating to body, but also the ancient elixir. Relationship among sigils, Enochian, and the grid. Part 6 is components of the grid sigil, central cross of union, fire quadrant, air quadrant, water quadrant, earth quadrant, positioning and alignments of the sectors, and practical applications. The Aeonic Grid Sigil, Part 7, or Space-Time Key, via implications of the aeon, space-time, the crown or propulsion quadrant, nadir quadrant, omega recycler quadrant, infinity weaver quadrant, and practical applications. This is wild stuff. Part 8, Sigil Keys of the Elements, understanding the elements via Enochian magic, earth sigils, water sigils, air sigils, fire sigils, Enochian calls as serial rite, and practical applications. The grid sigils, part 9, and the Enochian alphabet. The connections, Pantheus, Samaritan, and ancient scripts. The logic of magical alphabets, Libarum and the grid, the body's language, and physical and celestial. Laborum and the grid, which is work. Or maybe Libarum, 131. Aha. Okay. So, yeah, this is working with the grid. It looked like a name too. I want to make sure I didn't forget something. Okay. Part 10, Thelema, Modern Magicians and the Grid Sigil, and the Book of the Law, the Circle Squared, Significance of Folk Art. There you go. Part 11 is Antithesis or Antithesis, Black Holes, and the Dark Side of the Sigil Grid. Another reason we're covering this on this channel. So, Da'ath and Antimatter, Black Hole, Safety Valve of the Grid, and Seeing and Equilibrium. Finally, Part 12, Magical Gates and their levels of significance. Chthonic Guardians, Necronomicon, Grid as Gate, Practical Applications. Then there's an afterword, there's an appendix, actually there's several appendices, and endnotes. So, the interesting things that I wanted to cover were that this relates cartography and creating sigils. I thought that was very interesting. Then we get into ley lines and geomagnetic fields and the Earth's grid, and we have a picture of Linda Florio's Yamatu there. The next thing that I thought was interesting is that it actually gives exercises, and it talks about the Rose Cross ritual, which we discussed earlier in Circles of Power by John Michael Greer, as a wonderful way of constructing a grid. And it's also good for healing as well, but it's good for forming and formulating a grid. It's almost like a Faraday cage, if you know what that is. So this gives exercises to work with these grids and these energies. Then we get into some yantras here and some mandalas, if you prefer. Then we get into early mnemonic scholia or sigils from R.W. Hunt manuscripts containing the indexing symbols of Robert Grosseteste, Bodleian Library Record 4. And these can be used for sigil craft as well, or mnemonics. The next thing that I thought, the whole book is interesting, of course, but, and then here's a sigil for Mikhail here, according to Agrippa. Let's see. The next thing that I thought was interesting, it's got alphabets in there as well. It goes into breath and sigil activation, which this video isn't too long yet, so I'll go ahead and read this very small section. Clearly, one of the key elements in Austin Sparr's method of sigilization, as in most, if not all, occult systems, is the controlled use of breath. Pranayama animates the body and soul so that they may be used to bring the magical act to life. In attaining the death posture, an egoless and vacuous state of consciousness, Sparr employed a method of breathing more akin to hyperventilation, or, in yogic terms, fire breath. As I've indicated, to attain this state, Spar advocated standing on one's tiptoes while facing a mirror and taking short, furious breaths until collapsing. Viewer discretion advised, obviously. Some may find Spar's death posture technique useful. However, I have not always found it so. I believe that it's a matter of personal preference. To get the most out of experimentation with various methods, one should keep close track to the various trials and errors in one's magical diary. So, moving on. Next, we have Babylon Temple by Linda Florio, circa 1993. All right. There's a lot of interesting things in this book. Here is the sigil keys of the elements as a chapter. And it opens the idea that 16 sigil keys enable the magician to explore and harness the 16 colic rays as they exist in our universe. 4 times 4 being 16. 4 elements. You get the idea? I'm not sure if you guys heard that or not, but someone just blew their horn right after I said that. Next, we have Hemeth-Tereth or Hemeth-Tereth by Linda Florio, which is an important plate. Moving on, there's only a few left. The idea of magical gates and their levels of significance. He says, probably one of the most alluring and controversial aspects of any magical system pertains to gates. The prospect of finding greater and more immediate access to the other side often compels many magicians to pursue these avenues, even if it means working with forces incompatible with the will. The suitability of working with gateways into parallel universes must be determined through much introspection, not to mention contact with the Holy Guardian Angel. The next part is the index. So, within this index, it shows the grid sigil, and it has, so there's a sigil for each call, basically. Relating to elements and basically the elements. So the first Enochian call written in Enochian with the sigil. And then let's go to the 30th. Oh, there's only the 17, 18. Okay, that makes sense. Okay. 16, Spirit, Shadow, we could call it to make it easy. So here is the 18th. All right. Then after that are translations of the calls in English. So, for instance, in Enochian, Ol Sanu Ferusagai Gohu Iade means I reign over you, saith the God of justice. You could say Balat or Balte. So Ol Sanu Ferusagai Gohu Iade Balte, or Balta, or Balat. However, Enochian's weird. So there are English translations for the calls, which I thought was pretty interesting. But again, it goes to the 18th call, Earth of Fire, but then it goes the call of the 30 Aethers, and just gives them all. Yeah. It goes to 23 in this edition, which is certainly intriguing. But maybe some of you would like to complete it. Some of you would like the extra work. Anyway, that's it for this book review of the Sacred Alignments and Sigils. There is a lot in here. We did not cover even a portion of it. It even gets into the, I forget what he called it, the alphabet of, help me. The alphabet of desire. Thank you. Whoever reached their fucking tendril into my temple there. Yeah, it even goes through the Alphabet of Desire by Spar. So this is like a supplementary work here. This is like if you like combining systems, if you're a bit of a syncretist like I am, if you like to get your hands dirty and like kind of make your own stuff, this is a perfect work that I highly recommend, and I'm highly grateful that the friend of the channel recommended it. So yeah, and go watch that video. It's a great video. It's an interview with John. Anyway, have a good rest of the day, good rest of the week. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave them below, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.